Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Pits of Metal Chaos. This is your host, Dave. I got line special guest guitarist from the old school band Realm, uh, Takis Kinis. How you doing, Takis?
I'm doing great. How are you, Dave?
I'm good. So you guys played a couple of reunion shows last year, right?
Correct, yeah. That was really kind of out of the blue for us. We never envisioned that we would have a circumstance where we could get everybody back together and actually do something. We kind of had toyed with the thought a little bit, but it just never came to fruition. We have people living all over the country. Mark, for example, lives out in Jersey, and Steve's up in Minnesota. And so it kind of makes rehearsals a little difficult,
Yeah.
when people are that far apart. It was kind of interesting even preparing for those because we did a lot of kind of individual study before we got together and even rehearsed as a band. So we really only got to rehearse for, roughly a week as an outfit prior to those shows. And that's unusual, because Realm was one of these bands that had this kind of like insane kind of work ethic where we rehearsed, like 4 or 5 nights a week. I thought it showed, when we would play live and record and stuff, we had a certain level of, precision that we kind of garnered just from so much rehearsal. And when we were prepping for this stuff, it was strange because first of all, I had to find another guitar player. So I called upon our friend Paul Terrian to help me out with the guitar stuff. There's just so many harmonies and riffs and stuff that you can't do with one guitar. And so it began really with Paul and I working out all the riffs, and in my case, it's like I'm trying to teach somebody how to play the riffs. I don't even remember how to play myself. So, even though I wrote much of it, recalling the exact nuances of all the stuff that you did back then is kind of a trip. And in some cases, Paul was teaching me my own riffs and vice versa. And, kind of a strange little thing. And then we would do this crazy little thing where we'd video record ourselves working through stuff, and then we'd email it to each other, and then Mark would videotape himself singing over it, and it was just weird stuff like that. And then when we finally got to the point of playing together, it was kind of an eye-opening experience, because I really hadn't played at volume for a number of years, and I know that Steve and Mike and Paul all were very active, all these years, basically working musicians for the most part. But Mark and I were kind of out of the fray, so I know that when we had that first loud volume rehearsal and we're all mic'd up, we got monitors going and everything, it kind of threw me back a little bit how loud it was. I just kind of forgot, that power, and you're generating and not listening to somebody else do it. But the cool thing was I thought we brought it together pretty well, and we had a great lineup for the show. We called our friends Last Crack and Renegade to join us, kind of recreating what I thought was a really special lineup from, 25, 26 years ago, maybe even longer than that. And I thought it went really well. It was kind of a nice mesh of musical styles. We're probably the heaviest amongst that crowd, but we always had a weird niche in metal, because we were certainly fast and we're heavy, but we weren't like a death metal band, we were more on the technical side, I think.
Yeah,
and,
progressive thrash metal.
Yeah, and I sometimes I don't even know where we fit in kind of the history of it, because we're not like Exodus or Forbidden or something like that, but we certainly touch upon that, and we played with those bands, so it's just kind of a strange fit in the genre. But in retrospect, when I look back on it, it was really because we kind of had our own unique voice, and I thought that was a good thing. A lot of bands end up sounding like so many others. You have to listen to a few songs before you can figure out who you're listening to. With Realm, I think you could just put a song on and go, "Oh yeah, that's Realm." Love it or hate it, either way, you could tell who we were, and I think that's a positive. And if you think of a lot of great bands out there, I think they fall into that category too. Like if you hear a Rush song, for example, you can totally tell it's Rush instantly.
Right.
So our personalities somehow shone through.
Yeah, you guys seem to have to have had a pretty big cult following back when you guys were going strong.
Yeah, Dave, I'm going to guess that you're probably many years my younger, and that's quite all right. And, and I'm not trying to come across like an old man or anything.
Well,
but, we were doing it
I'm 50.
for a while.
I'm 51.
Oh, all right. Well, apologies then. You're in the same age bracket as me. You don't fall into the boomer category, though,
No.
do you?
Yeah, I got to see you guys at the Milwaukee Metal Fest.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, Jack Costa.
Yeah, we got to play the first few. We did. Yeah, we were friends with Jack, so he got us on that bill pretty consistently. And then we kind of laid off of it for a while, and then we came back through, and we were touring with Death Angel and Forbidden, and that was kind of fun. That was always an interesting time at the Metal Fest for sure.
I remember seeing you guys. I forgot who you played with, but I remember seeing you at the Cubby Bear in Chicago.
Yeah, that's right. I think that was touring with Testament and Raven, if I remember right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, at the Cubby Bear. Yeah, that was an interesting show too. Some of them are a blur when you play shows, and then with others you have these really fond recollections of things that happen or whatever. But if you're on the road every night and you're hitting the show every night, they kind of blur together, and you're like, was that Chicago or was that Detroit? I forget. So I wonder what those big touring bands are like if they're out there every single night. They must, hello Cincinnati, and they're somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how you had to get a second guitar player to do the reunion shows, and you got another Paul.
Yeah, that wasn't by design, by the way. It just happened to work out that way. That was kind of a hard choice to make. There's so many good guitar players out there, and I don't want to short my own skills as a guitar player, but I wouldn't call myself a great guitar player. I just practiced a lot back in the day, and I was tight with the group. I was never one of those guys where you would sit down and say, "Hey, do you know how to play that Guns N' Roses song?" I'd be like, "No, sorry, didn't learn that one." Because we just spent so much time doing our own stuff, I never really put myself in that category. I did school myself. So I went to school at the Wisconsin Conservatory and got a 2-year diploma or certificate or whatever they call it there. And so I learned, formal study of music. And for me, that really helped because I didn't actually do that until Realm was signed, believe it or not. We got signed and then I went to school for music. But when I needed to pick a second guitar player, I had a bunch of people I was thinking of asking, and I didn't want to ask people from out of town because that would make it really hard to work through things. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm replacing somebody in the band that was, in many people's minds, maybe the most key member of the band, honestly, because Paul, we rehearsed at his house, he wrote a lot of the material, both, music and lyrics, and he was a creative force, he often, backed the band financially and, did so much for us. And then to replace somebody like that, who had this innately positive personality, was really difficult. So I wanted to pull somebody in that I felt was also of that kind of positive mindset and had a good nature about them. And it wasn't just about how well they played the guitar. My opinion is I could probably take any decent guitar player and teach them the riffs and we can do it, but you have to have a personality behind it too. And that's why I chose to work with Paul. And I think it worked out pretty well. We've already started rehearsing for the shows coming up, blowing the rust off. At least this time we don't have to learn everything from scratch. We're just kind of, refreshing what we're doing.
Yeah.
That was kind of weird, man. It was definitely a trip. But I still have, Steve and Mike in the band and Mark on vocals. The fact that we could work it out with Mark being so far away, I had that worry too that, how could we ever do it without Mark because his voice is so unique. I think instrumentalists you can probably replace a lot easier than a vocalist,
Oh yeah. So now you and Paul Luganowski, you guys formed the band Realm back in '85.
Yep. The interesting story with that one is drummer who ended up later in Nitro, and then the drummer from my very first band, Prophet, Tom Turkel. But I think Mark and Tony, I forget if they left to go join Firing Squad back then. I'm pretty sure that's the band they went to join. And then Paul and I were like, well, now what? And so I answered an ad in the Shepherd Express. I think it was just called the Express back then, or the Shepherd, one of the two, which was basically auditioning for a guitar player for a band called Blood Hunt. You know, they're a South Milwaukee band. And so basically what we did is we just merged with them, and that was Roger Godfrey, Mike Sticks, and Doug Parker, our original singer. And very quickly we ended up recording a demo, wrote 4, 5, 6 songs, got them on MSC probably within a month of forming. And then we did one show at the Landing. I think that was probably in like December of, 85. And then did a show with Megadeth. And then I think right around that point, we decided that, you know, Roger and Mike Sticks were really the right fit for the band in a number of different ways. You know, philosophically, partially, different kind of approach to what the kind of stuff we want to play and kind of like the image of the band and all that. And so we found Mike and Steve, and then we continued on with Doug for a while, did a second demo, Final Solution. And a lot of people, that's like the first thing they heard from Realm was Final Solution. And we sold so many copies of that cassette tape, you know, back in the tape trading days. And, you know, and back then the way that the word got around is like you'd send your tape to a fanzine, you know, and the fanzine would do a little write-up on you, and you'd send them a picture or something, and they'd post that, and people read the article, and then they send you a letter in the mail with like cash in it or a check or something to buy your tape, you know. And just through that process alone, I think we did well over like 5,000-6,000 cassettes just through the mail, and then in shows and stuff. And so in a lot of ways that was kind of like our first record, even though it was a demo. And I thought it was a really cool recording because we kind of did it on the cheap. You know, we recorded the tracks really fast. We didn't have enough money to mix it, so we gave it to our good friend Jim Barks, who happened to be an intern down at Royal Recorders in Lake Geneva. And that particular studio was the one that was responsible for a lot of like really big albums of the era, including Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction and like Bon Jovi's like big first album, whatever that was called. I really don't know. And a few others, you know, like of that caliber of that era. And we got to mix our Final Solution tape on that equipment. And so it had a big, full, rich sound to it, you know, for a demo tape. So that's kind of what opened a lot of doors for us, you know. We already had kind of a little bit of a communication going with Roadrunner Records, even off of the first demo tape. We sent that out to them, and the owner of the label back then, Case Wessels, called us personally and said, "Hey, I really like your tape. Can you send me some new stuff? I'd really like to sign you guys." And little did we know it would take a number of years. It was actually like a 4 or 5 year process to kind of get to the point where we actually inked the deal with the label. And it was their New York office that kind of, you know, drove the deal home. And I think that the song that really sold it to them was our cover of Eleanor Rigby. They saw that as really, you know, marketable. Even though we kind of saw it as more of a joke, you know, than like something real, you know.
Right.
But I mean, that's kind of how music is, you know. Sometimes, you know, the stuff that gets promoted about you isn't the stuff you want to promote. But, you know, hey, it did open a lot of doors. It got us, you know, touring. It got us on the radio. It got us, you know, all sorts of really cool stuff. And people still look back on it fondly. So, not sure what else to add aside from that.
Now, how the album do sales wise for Endless War?
You know, Dave, I wish I could answer that with some like clarity of like I sold like 50 million copies, but you know, it's not at all in that kind of league. You know, somewhere I have like old royalty statements I could look at. You know, it was probably in, you know, in the tens of thousands, and I really couldn't even give you an exact number. Not that I really think that's even important. I think for me, it's like the fact that it even got, canonized, if you know what I mean. In other words, it's like once you get like on a real record label, whether it's good or bad or famous or insignificant, it's still out there for real. It's kind of like an author getting a book out there, and it's kind of like something you've earned and you can't take away, like a college degree, And so for whatever that's worth, you just try to give some perspective on it, really.
So how was it recording your sophomore effort, Suicide?
Well, that's a good question. That was a lot different process than the demos, which were really hurried. And even the first album was really hurried. We did that. I think we tracked it all in a week out at Breezeway Studios in Waukesha, and then we took it down to Antioch, Illinois, and mixed it in I think it was less than 2 weeks, maybe like 10 days or something. Studios were really expensive back then. You'd pay like, I don't know, $50, $60 an hour. And then when you block it out for weeks at a time, you can do the math on that. And so many times we'd work like 18, 20-hour days, barely sleep, we're doing mixes and stuff and just crank it out. But when we did the Suicide thing, it was much different. We got what I would call a significantly better budget. And so we were able to block out a studio. In fact, not too far from where I live right now. It's about a block and a half away from my house here on the east side of Milwaukee. And it was a studio owned by Victor DiLorenzo of the Violent Femmes. And the reason we chose the place is, well, he had the right gear. He had an amazing board and the right 24-track tape machine. It was convenient, and we could block out the whole studio. And we did for, I think, like 3 months. The studio was ours, which gives you a different workflow. So we took a lot more time to, get the sounds right and get the performances right, and didn't have to pull so many all-nighters. The only disappointment with that one is we got to the point where the record was getting ready to be released, and the record label kept pressing us, and our producer Jim ended up doing the final mix on his own without us there. So it's not exactly the way we envisioned the presentation of the record. Not that I'm not proud of it. I am. I think the songs in that record, personally, I like those a lot better than anything we did before then. But I think, in some ways, the guitars could have been louder, that kind of thing. Just stuff that people listen to and they go, "Oh, I don't hear anything wrong with it." But as a musician, you go, "Oh, I think I need a little more 400 hertz in my guitar," and you get really nitpicky about stuff. But I'm proud of it. I think the songs on that record are amazing, and I have a hope someday, Dave, that we can take those tracks and redigitize them and maybe remix it or something. Not holding my breath on it, but maybe before the tapes degrade and turn to dust. But that whole process is so much fun, being in the studio. And I was rehearsing with Paul Terrian the other night, and we just briefly talked about that. That for me, it was always more about the creation of the songs, and then getting into a studio and making them just so and putting it out to the world. That was more important to me as an artist than it was even performing. The performing is always cool because you connect with your fans, but that recording, outlives you, and when I listen back to something that we did that long ago, and I think it still sounds pretty decent, I go, okay, well, at least we did a good job on it and still sounds good. It doesn't sound like it was done in the basement somewhere,
Now, I'm sure a big question you get from a lot of fans and people out there is, will you guys ever do any new recordings?
Well, that's a minefield, I guess, a little bit, because really, we're getting together to do some shows, but I'm not necessarily sure I would call us a band at this point. There's a lot of pressure coming from the outside world, I think, where people are asking us to play shows and do tours and stuff, and people are asking to put out records for us. I don't know if that would ever happen. I mean, the reality is, Steve still lives in Minnesota. Mark still lives in New Jersey. So like doing, a formalized project with people who all have like full-time careers and families and homes and lives basically in other places, it becomes a little difficult. I mean, maybe one possibility might be to like finish up some recordings we never finished. So for example, when we finished our deal with Roadrunner, we demoed a bunch of stuff in our basement and then went into the studio. And at that time, I was also working as both a live sound engineer and a studio engineer over at Cornerstone with Paul Knievers. And so, when the studio was in downtime, I could go in there with, the band and we could record tracks. And we did a little bit of that. And so Realm, I think we recorded like, I want to say 5 or 6 tracks there. And some of them are complete and some of them are not. So we hypothetically have enough to put out another album almost, if the tracks are finished. But at the same time, I don't really see that as like the same caliber of recording that we did on the albums, where we had, a producer like Jim Bart sitting there, basically, whipping us into shape, with somebody going, that was really good, but you know what, it wasn't good enough, and it's really hard to hear that as a musician, that it's, you like to think that, hey, I played that on. It's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
There's kind of like that. And I have to thank him very much for that. Jim Bartz is really good at kind of extracting from us what I would call almost like superhuman performances in some cases, where you'd play a solo like a bunch of times and you'd be like, yeah, that was good, but it wasn't great. It didn't move me. So it was always like he was pushing us to go to that 110%, like do that something that you normally wouldn't do, and push the boundaries with it. And I think when I listen to the recordings, I listen back to them, and the stuff that he made us do that on, and I go, yeah, he was totally right, man. That's so much better that way. And sometimes it takes that outsider perspective to kind of give you that. And then it also takes, I think, a little bit of putting your ego in check and saying, hey, wait a second, I know what I'm doing, and listen to somebody and say, no, this is better. And it's difficult as a musician when you put a lot of time into what you're working on, But if we put out something else, I don't know. I have been kind of toying with some of our old tracks, from time to time. I've done some mixes of them myself and digitized some of them. And I currently have one of my friends, Miko, working up some mixes on some of those old tracks because I think he gets like really amazing drum sounds. And given how long ago the stuff was recorded, back then everything was, analog. The microphones weren't as good. The outboard gear wasn't as good. And so you're taking all that and you move it into the digital realm where you can kind of make it something else. But at the same time, I'm not a huge fan of what I hear from a lot of modern metal in terms of like how they record stuff, where like drum tracks, for example, like all the drums are triggered samples. Like they play it, right? But you're triggering a pre-recorded sound in the recording that sounds perfect, right? And it has none of the real dynamics of the drummer in there. And you can extend that to a lot of the other aspects of the recording. So I was always like, if the band is a good sounding band naturally without putting any mics in front of them, you put them on a recording and they should sound amazing. And so I was never a fan of like, over processing, something to make it sound like, it comes from some different planet, The basic was always better for me. I don't know. Give you a little mixed philosophy there, Dave.
Now, how did the name Realm come about?
Well, that's a funny story too. This is like, the original incarnation of Realm, with Roger, Mike, and Doug, and Paul and I. And basically, we all had a name we wanted to call the band. Now, I don't remember what everybody's choice was. I remember what mine was. I wanted to call the band Sycorax. And everybody's like, what the hell is that? Well, it's the name of a witch in one of the Shakespeare plays that I was reading at school at the time. And I don't know, it just kind of looked cool. It had the letter X in it and the Y in it. I just thought it could look cool for a logo. It was definitely unique. It was Paul Leganowski's choice to do Realm, and I forget what the other guys chose, but we all wrote band names on a slip of paper and literally put them in a hat, and then we had somebody draw the paper out. But little did we know, Paul Leganowski rigged it. He put all the slips of paper said Realm in the hat. I don't know how he pulled it off. Maybe when we weren't looking or something. So that's how the band name came about. Kind of a funny little story, I suppose.
Yeah.
But ultimately we did have a choice. Paul decided for us.
I know. So now, let's go into your musical history now. What age did you start playing the guitar?
Wow, that's a good question. I'd say about, I think it was about 11. I got a guitar for Christmas from some of our family friends. It was just a bad acoustic. And that at that time, my family, I'm Greek. That's my heritage. Pretty much my mom's whole extended family lived on one street in Milwaukee on like 43rd and Fleet. We had like a whole Greek entourage there. And my uncle, who lived next door to us, he was a guitar player / accordion player, and he taught me my first few chords, like a couple of minor chords. And Dave, I have a little special treat here. I actually have a guitar plugged in and sitting on my lap. I'm plugged into the computer downstairs, and he just taught me like an A minor and a D, and then he put like Greek beats to it, like that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I first learned how to play. And then when I was in junior high school, I ended up breaking my wrist on my left hand on the parallel bars at school pretty severely. It like both bones broke all the way through, and then I couldn't play for it was probably a year and a half. So I didn't like pick it back up again until I like turned just turned 15, I'd say. And I bought better instruments at that time, and then started getting together with some guys from school, in high school, and it was kind of like a mix of. I went to Tosa East High School in Milwaukee, and I connected up with some people who lived down in West Dallas, and they were like West Dallas Central people. They're kind of like a rival high school. But we had a couple people from West Dallas, a couple people from Tosa, and we formed a band called Prophet. Learned a bunch of covers, so we did like a lot of, I don't know, like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest back then, and like Leonard Skinner and stupid stuff like that. And by the time I was, 15 and a half, like half a year later, I was like playing in nightclubs. Our drummer had this, like connection because his older brother played in like country bands, and we started playing club gigs before I was even of age. Of course, back then they didn't care so much. It's like if you had facial hair, here's beer. And so that band named Prophet, we were together for a number of years. And I kind of cut my teeth on that band and really learned how to write music in that band too. So like we took a lot of our influences and started writing a lot of originals. So we I'm trying to think of like Prophet hits like I'm kind of tempted to play them on the guitar, but I think I'm going to refrain. But we eventually ended up parting company. But then I kind of reconnected with the drummer Don Turkle in that cover band prior to Realm called Fallout. So that's kind of how it progressed. But at the time, I really didn't like study music formally. I just kind of would get together with friends, maybe pick up like a book from the music store or something, and learn how to do a couple of chords. We didn't have the internet like the kids have now. Right. So if you want to learn how to play guitar, I look at my daughter, and she, taught herself how to play the ukulele by just watching YouTube, and then now she's playing guitar too, and it's amazing. Now you just go out there. It's like, what song do you want to learn? Somebody's got the song all broken down with all the tab and how to play it and what effects to use and how to set your amp, and it's all like done for you already. And so like if I wanted to be in a Slayer cover band or whatever, I could just go out, buy the book, read the notes, and I'm good. Just practice a little bit. But back then it was a lot more of a process, and it took me a while to really kind of latch on to how music actually worked. So I did a lot of mimicking of, our idols. It's like, Maiden and Judas Priest style riffs. I mean, that was like really a huge influence on myself. And I think probably, when I think back on it, when I was jamming with Paul Leganowski and we, got in the band together, we were both kind of used to being lead guitarists. So I was the lead guitarist in Realm, or in Prophet, and he was the lead guitarist in Fallout. And then when we joined up, and it's like, well, I'm going to play some leads too. He's like, no, I'm going to play some leads, And so we kind of modeled ourselves a little bit on how Iron Maiden and Judas Priest would trade off their solos. And maybe a little more so on, I think maybe on how Judas Priest did it, where, they got like a section. One guy does like a riff for like 2 measures, and the other guy jumps in and does a riff, and they switch back and forth. And sometimes they harmonize. And it was kind of like a healthy competition, frankly. And what that did is it pushed us both to be better guitar players. And then as a result, we ended up doing a lot of harmony stuff. So instead of like always playing the same chords or always playing the same riffs, we would start to break things down into inversions. So like if we're playing like a chord pattern, why should we both play exactly the same thing? We can make it sound fuller if I play the 5th up or a 4th down or a minor 3rd or something like that. And I don't know, some of it's a philosophy thing too. I mean, some bands are fine having one guy that does all the leads. We were always in this healthy competition, and as a result of that, found these really unique ways to do things. I think like meshing our tones together, so the EQ of them kind of like created this full spectrum thing, and discovered a boost pedal. A lot of people back then, when you did a lead, you'd always maybe you turn on your tube screamer and hope the sound man would turn you up when you did your lead. But Paul had this like thing in his carbon head. I think it was basically an effects loop, and if he didn't have anything hooked up to it, he could crank the volume on it, step on a switch, and all of a sudden he's like 30 dB louder or something, cutting through the mix. And I'm like, well, hey, I have to do that too. So I got myself like this old Boss EQ with a slider on it that where you can just totally boost yourself and tweak the tone a little bit, and I would kind of use that as my boost. And when we did these shows last year, I brought out that whole original rig, same rig I used, back then. Same pedals, same chords and tubes, I think, in the amps. But that boost from that EQ, I always loved it because it was a clean boost, and then you could hit it at those key times and just pull yourself up and above the mix. And even if you had a good sound man, you never worried about your stuff being heard. And so we kind of had a little bit of volume wars. Realm ended up becoming pretty obnoxiously loud on stage. Not that that's a bad thing. I think for metal, I think you have to have some impact on stage.
Oh yeah.
But we weren't like I would say overly distorted. So like even the guitar I have in my lap right now, like we'd play like rhythm parts, and I hear a lot of young players, they put so much distortion in their sound, like they let go of the strings and it goes to feedback immediately, or they do a sharp stop and it sounds real noisy or something. And one of, I think, the tricks that we had in our tone, it was more about volume than distortion. And there's a clarity that comes with that, and a power that comes with that. So like when you articulate like a fast picking part, like it's more defined, but all the little picking is defined. Where if it's super distorted, it just sounds like mush. And like the aspect of the guitar tone where I can just basically turn it down and I can actually do some clean playing off the same sound without feeding back and stuff. It's just kind of like on the verge of clean. It's more about the crispness of it. And so I think of like, if you listen to a lot of the old thrash bands and you listen really closely to their tone, they're not really that distorted, especially in the rhythm parts. And there's an articulation there and a clarity. And then I think when they really, kick into the super heavy sound, like so we started seeing a lot of death metal bands, there's also a correlation to like the tuning down. A lot of the early thrash bands, we just tuned to E. You know, if we were really brave, you'd go to E flat. Realm always stayed at E, and I think there's a different sound to it. You know, so like I listen to like all like the new metal stuff, and everybody tunes down to like B or C or whatever. You know, and to me that gets a little boring after a while, honestly.
Yeah, all the times I've seen you guys live, you guys are always awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I've never seen a bad Realm show.
Yeah, I thought we were pretty good live most of the time. You know, live is always fun because you know you live with the goof ups, you know, and you have to play through them. And you know, no live show is perfect.
Yeah, but with the reunion shows last year, I did see some video clips. You guys sounded great in the reunion shows.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So now you are self-taught on guitar?
Originally I was self-taught, and then, like I said, when I was, gosh, I guess I was maybe around 20, 21, somewhere in that range. You know, I was starting to go back to school. You know, I had kind of not went right to college right after high school. I waited a little bit, and so I went and studied business actually in MATC. I'm like, man, I don't want to be a businessman. I want to be a musician. You know, so I'm like, you know what? My parents are willing to pay for it. I'm going to go to the conservatory and study guitar too. And I think that for me, that was really eye-opening because as a musician, sometimes you just learn how to do stuff. Like you learn like what chords fit together and what notes to play, but you don't really understand why. What studying music did for me is I started to understand why it fits. You know, why this note is the right note as opposed to that note, or why it's okay sometimes to hit the wrong note in certain situations and bend it or, you know, work with it, you know. So studying really kind of opened it up for me. But, you know, I don't think that's necessarily the best path for everybody, but I don't know how you can be a decent musician if you don't really get kind of intrigued by your instrument and the whole process of music. And with that whole process of music, you know, and kind of schooling myself, I think that I opened up to other forms of music ultimately as a result of it. You know, like when I got together with my wife when I was younger, you know, my mindset coming into that relationship was like, I'm all metal. Listen to a couple of other things, but it was pretty much all metal. And then she was into so much more of a variety of things like jazz and blues and, you know, prog. And so I started exploring all those things. And I'm to the point now where I like if I'm at work working, you know, it's probably either some metal in the background or some jazz in the background. I mean, one of those kind of things. But I'm just so intrigued by the whole process of music creation and the virtuosity of all these different genres and how they all influence each other. And I'm always happy to see when there's young people kind of picking up the, you know, the baton or whatever you want to call it and moving forward with doing new things, you know. And I think that, you know, when Rome was going, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of inventiveness in music. And I'm not saying that there isn't now, but it's different. And a lot of it is because the tools are different. So people sit at home, like I am right now. You know, I got my guitar in my lap and I'm plugged into the computer, and they record themselves and they do entire albums that way and never even play with band. And I'm not saying that's bad, but there's a different connectivity that happens when you jam with musicians. And I'll have to say that I felt very, very fortunate, Dave, because the people that I played with, I look back on it, you know, like Mike Olson, amazing drummer, Steve Post, I mean, God on bass, you know, et cetera, et cetera. All these people that were really kind of like almost at, I'm not going to say virtuoso levels, but, you know, verging on that. And then, wow, I got to play with that guy, you know, and they're amazing, you know, and then that rubs off on you when you play with people of that caliber. And even our follow-up band, when we did, you know, White Fear Chain, it was kind of the same way. You know, the band kind of splintered after 92, 93, somewhere in that range. And the first thing we had to do is find a drummer. And while we did have a number of drummers we knew in the area that tried out, and they were, really excellent drummers. And most of them went on to do really prominent things. It was kind of like, I don't know, there's something missing. There's some sort of spark or something. They're hitting all the right beats, but it's just not right. I don't even know how to put it from a musical standpoint. And then we went out to a club one night and saw Brian Reidinger play with the cover band Gemini, playing some cover song and throwing all this extra stuff in. And I was like, holy cow, that's a monster. And of course he jammed with us, and it was awesome. You know what I mean? And then we pulled a Butto in from Last Crack to play with that band too. And I was always a huge fan of Last Crack. And the fact that we got to do work with him, I mean, just, kind of blew me away, So feel fortunate, I didn't have like situations where we had bands that were highly transient, where I'd look at other bands and say, oh, yeah, we kicked this dude out, we got a new dude, and then you have to rework all your stuff again, We had a pretty solid lineup once we got Mike, Steve, and Mark in the band. That was, we were kind of like a family, brothers, Spent so much time together jamming and touring. Kind of like a 5-way marriage, really.
Well, that's one of the best things when the band feels like a family unit.
Right, and even though we moved our separate ways over time, and not that we didn't have our issues, but we're still all friendly and good with each other. Obviously well enough to get together and jam again. We're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I still get to see Mike from time to time when he does shows with Thrasher.
Yeah. Amazing he can still play that fast. I was going, holy shit, drummers are, they really, their, role is so physical on the drums. I sit here and sweat playing the guitar sitting in the chair. You can just imagine you're like, playing like Sepultura or something at like lightning speed.
Yeah, he handles it though.
Yeah, no doubt. He's a monster player.
So what are some of your fondest memories of the band Realm?
Wow, great question, Dave. There's so many. There's like the standard tour stories. That's one thing I always loved about going out on the road with the guys is however short the tour would be, whatever you do on the road, it's like you're living like 10 lifetimes in a day kind of thing. Hard to explain. It's just like there's a different level of existence or something when you hit the road and you're doing nothing but the music. And, you're stuck in the van with the same people, you're partying with the same people, you're hanging out, you're eating all your meals together. So many great stories. I mean, wow. I'm trying to think of like, okay, well, here's a highlight for me. Remember playing in Tucson, and we had this dude traveling with us who was doing our merch and driving us. His name was Enor Mess, a friend of ours from Chicago. And we're driving down the road, and he's a little bit of a hothead, get him all like miffed, and he hadn't maybe like smoked his weed for the day or whatever. And he'd get all hot and bothered about the stupidest shit, like, hey, what do you guys want to listen to? I don't know. And Norm got so pissed that he just got, like, about what we were going to listen to. He just ripped the stereo out of the dash and threw it out the window. And it landed on the streets of Tucson, So from there on, for the rest of the tour, we had no music in the van. So nobody could complain about what we were listening to, It was just, stupid shit like that. Just, I don't know, some of the venues we played were, think back to, like, playing in, like, Tijuana, where I think the name of the club was, like, Iguanas, and all the kids would, like, there was, like, chain link fences along the sides of the venue and, like, over the ceiling. And people would climb that stuff. So if you can imagine climbing up, like, the sidewalls of a chain link fence that's, like, 20, 30, 40 feet high, and then going across the ceiling, still hanging on.
Wow.
And then like,